Okay, the Baroque period. Baroque comes from a Portuguese word barroco, which means an oddly shaped pearl. I'm not sure the significance of that, but when we say Baroque, we're talking about a period in Europe used to describe a style of architecture, dance, music, which was prevalent in Europe from about 1600 to 1758 of the Common Era. So, historical events. I got King Louis became the king at the age of 4 of France in 1643. He didn't actually take over ruling the country until his top chief minister died. That was in 1661. So Louis would have been about 23 years old when he took over France. He reigned for 72 to 73 years. He died in 1715, making him the longest reigning king or monarch in the history of Europe. I've got 1607. Virginia Company established Jamestown Colony. A group of about 100 people came over, English citizens. They settled by the James River in what we now know as Virginia. They suffered a lot through plague, famine, pestilence. There was some people believe they had to cannibalize a little bit to survive some of those early winters, the starving time they call it, and eventually they established some crops like corn and tobacco. Tobacco made the Jamestown colonies very successful. So the third event I've got is January 8th, 1642. Galileo Galilei died. He was an astronomer, physicist, mathematician. He made huge contributions to science in the study of motion. Helped develop the scientific method, ideas that we use today about experimentation and things like that. The improvements he made to the telescope. But a lot of people say Galileo invented the telescope, but he actually didn't. It was a German guy that invented the telescope, but he made a lot of improvements on it and made a lot of observations with it. I think at one point he had a telescope, the magnification power of 20. So he studied the heavens with that thing a lot and helped us to understand it. He's the first one who decided that there were moons around some of these planets. He helped to develop the idea that these planets were flawed, they weren't pristine. So people thought of the universe at the time and everything in the heavens was perfect and flawless, right? But he could see through the textures of the moon that there were actually craters and flaws to some of these things, which was kind of a big idea or shift in thought. The Roman Catholic Church, the ideas of the time were that the heavens and the universe in order were created by God for man, right? Man was the center of the universe, God's universe, and so they believed in this geocentric structure to the solar system as well. Nicholas Copernicus offered up the idea of a heliocentric model, which said that the planets and the Earth actually revolved around the sun. Well, the Catholic Church considered this to be heresy. Galileo got caught up in that, and through his observations, supported Copernicus's ideas and the Copernican model. And this eventually led to him suffering through the Inquisition by the Roman Catholic Church and being sentenced to life in prison. So, January 8th, 1642, Galileo died. Philosophical ideas. That was kind of hard for me to pinpoint any kind of philosophical or religious ideas at the time. The Reformation, early Reformation efforts were going on. Martin Luther, Calvin, these guys were coming up with. Well, I'll talk about that more in a minute. But so from what I could find, basically the ideas of philosophy at the time were most of these great thinkers and philosophers were starting to think about the world, the universe, mankind, our place in the universe in relation to these new ideas about science and math and the physical world around us that were being observed by new methods and scientific theory and scientific methods of experimentation. So all the thinking at the time was beginning to shift. I think the foundations of the Enlightenment thinkers, um, really, the Enlightenment thought and stuff like that started to happen during the Baroque period. Again, because all their ideas and things had been up to this point given to them, presented to them through theology and religion. And so what we were finding out about the physical world and the natural world around us was beginning to be in direct contrast to a lot of the ideas that had been accepted um, and presented by the church. So I think that early Enlightenment thinking came about in the Baroque period. Now that gets to the art forms. So the architecture. I really enjoyed the Gothic period when we studied it and seeing some of those churches like Amiens and these French cathedrals. I thought were the epitome of ornate decoration and the idea of man trying to express God here on earth. But then I opened up a folder and read the article in the Baroque folder on Blackboard and saw these pictures of these stunning cathedrals interiors, altars, sanctuaries. They were so elaborate. The Baroque architecture of these churches, I guess the main thing that would make them an entity of their own was just the ornate use of marble and gold and brass, bronze, and twisting columns and uh, angels all around, and they were always had a cupola or a dome above, and a lot of them, when you look up, you could see there would be a picture of a painting of the heavens. So it's like you could transcend through the sanctuary straight into heaven. That kind of an idea seemed to be presented by the architectural styles of the time. I wrote down, usually very ornately decorated. The altar would be the focal point. Um, yeah, so that would be, I'd say that the architecture of the Baroque period is classified by elaborately embellished, ornate interiors, just mind-blowing detail and activity, even in the decoration. So then that brings it to painting, the second art form. Baroque painters, they wanted to separate themselves from the Renaissance painters. They did this through a few means. They used primary colors a lot: red, yellow, blue. They often would incorporate really dark backgrounds. Most of the Renaissance paintings we had were serene scenes of serenity and peace and tranquility, with these heavenly figures presented as models of perfection, spiritual perfection, physical perfection. Well, when we get to the Baroque period, that started to change. There were, more flaws and things in the arts. There are a lot of dark backgrounds with brightly lit subjects in the foreground. Let's see what I wrote here. They seem to include more intense movements. There was more movement and action. Most of them were scenes of action that were captured instead of just, stationary figures in the Renaissance paintings of like the school of Aristotle or whatever, where everybody's just laying around perfectly still. When we get to the Baroque period, everybody's in movement and action. There's passion displayed on the faces and in the scenes. The high drama, this is what I wrote. The high drama of the chosen scenes of Baroque painters was made clear by the movements, but also by the expressions on the faces. Rather than evenly lit scenes, they also painted in a spotlight effect. So often you'd see light come, and I like that they shifted. A lot of times they shifted the action over to the side instead of in the center of the painting. Um, so that brings us to Michelangelo Caravaggio, right? It's a prime example of Baroque painter. During the time of Protestantism was on the rise, and so the Roman Catholic Church was kind of wanted to fight this, and they wanted to incorporate a new style into the paintings in these churches, and so Caravaggio was perfect for that. And the style that he brought was amazingly different. One thing I love about Caravaggio is he chose to depict these scenes from the Bible, right, in modern settings. For example, the calling of Matthew. You've got these guys over here on this table counting money. They look like they're almost at a poker table, like just, con men or card sharks in the corner of the painting, and then the light coming through the window casting on them, and the hand of Jesus outstretched pointing at Matthew. It's dark. A lot of Caravaggio stuff was very dark to me. You got the painting of the Virgin Mary as she's on her deathbed. She's all bloated and dying, and you could see the horror on the faces of the people around. And he did paintings of the beheading of John the Baptist, where, even as the body's on the ground and the blood's running from the neck, Caravaggio even wrote his name in the blood at the bottom of the painting, which is very dark. And there's another saint that he's picturing, maybe Bartholomew. And he's an old man, haggard in appearance, balding, and definitely nothing divine in his appearance and in any of the characters, the biblical characters and saints that he would paint. Nothing was really divine about the way he presented them. And there's even a skull on the table of, I believe it's Saint Bartholomew. So his work was just very dark. There's a painting where I can't remember who the characters were, but there's a man in like a toga, and he's up on a table, and he's drawn back as if he's about to kill this guy, and the scene around them, all the people looking on, were just people you would see in any pub or in some type of bar scene. And even Caravaggio himself is in the painting in the background, and he's fleeing from the action. There's a lot of action, in these Baroque paintings, especially Caravaggio's. I wrote painting Saint Matthew is bald and dirty. It showed the foul, bloated state of the death of the Virgin. There's one where it's the Madonna of the Pilgrims, where you're showing it's Virgin Mary, but she's not pictured as royalty or divine in any way. It's just this old, poor woman standing at the door of some shack with this big, fat, trailer park looking baby on her hip. And the pilgrims that have come to pay homage to the Blessed Savior, right? Instead of being magi or these people that look they've come from the Far East, these are just beggars off the street. They're just down on their knees at the door, and you can even see their feet are even dirty. He put a lot of imperfection into his subject matter, even in his still lives that he painted early on. Baskets of fruit where the leaves would be rotting, the fruit would be rotting, there'd be wormholes in the apples, and I really love that about Caravaggio. His stuff was so realistic. He wasn't up to this point in Renaissance paintings and things like that. It was almost like the stuff was supposed to look like God Himself had painted these pictures, but this wasn't the case in the Baroque, and with Caravaggio especially, you could tell that it was just a flawed man that had painted these things, and the things that he knew were of flawed men and women. I really like Caravaggio's stuff, and don't want to go into his life too much, but he was actually convicted of murder, and then he got exiled, and then when he was allowed to come back, there was a price put on his head, a bounty put on his head, and when the Pope changed, I think it went from Urban to can't remember the other Pope's name. Anyway, so he painted a picture of David with Goliath's head. He used himself as the head, so it was like he was offering his own head in exchange for the ability to come back to Rome. Sculpture. Baroque sculpture seemed to draw from classical Greek and Roman sculpture as far as that they used the idealized human form. All that exists, but what they did is he began to use more action. Again, just like the paintings of Caravaggio, you would see more action, motion, and drama in their work. Began to use a term, what we call figura serpentina, which means they would arrange the figures in a spiraling upward, right? And so they would be able to be viewed from all different, they were intended to be viewed from all different sides instead of just one angle. Probably the best example of Baroque sculpture is Gian Lorenzo Bernini. His works were highly dramatic, full of life and movement, making them seem so real. He used facial expressions in all his carvings. The rapture of Saint Teresa. You can see the ecstasy on her face. I get that. And then you got King David when he's pulling back to slay Goliath that Bernini caused, and he's biting on his lower lip, and you can see the focus in his furrowed brow, and just the focus and intensity of the figures. We've got Apollo and Daphne, the look of terror on Daphne's face uh, as she's metamorphosing into a tree. I love that the fingers are actually turned into leaves, and it's amazing too. Then you got the Rape of Proserpina. That one blew my mind when I first saw it. How Poseidon's got his hand wrapped around the back of this girl, and where he's grabbing her thigh, the flesh dimples in, and you can actually see the force and the strength with which he's gripping her thigh. That's amazing that somebody could do that into marble. I don't even know how you could imagine these things. It's like with Bernini and the fabric that he used. He used a lot of fabric, which was amazing. You could see the wind in the fabric. It's like you can sense the air. He's carving the breeze into the marble. Most of his paintings, to me, they seem like, he froze these moments in time, almost like Vesuvius erupting. It's like Pompeii with Bernini sculptures, man. He captured these moments in time perfectly and froze them. It's amazing. I don't even know how anyone would have the vision to see these things in a piece of marble, much less carve them. So again, the cloth he used, capturing the wind and the moment, the action of these scenes, distinctly Baroque, distinctly Bernini. Thank you.